Okay, so, I mean, you can probably figure out what I'm going to be talking about based on the name of the slideshow. We're going to be going through the story of how I did Linux from scratch, how you might do Linux from scratch if you choose to do it yourself. I'll give a few disclaimers. Number one is that uh, I am presenting on a MacBook. I would have brought my framework had the drivers not broken on me, and so I apologize for that, given that we're at a Linux convention. Number two is that I had marked this presentation for all levels of experience, but a lot of the things that I end up doing inside of Linux from scratch are very complex, and I actually don't understand a lot of them myself. So I'm going to try my best to explain them, but if you don't understand, it's probably my fault. And number three is that I've timed this presentation, and I have 45 minutes to complete it, and we're going to go way under. So, sorry. So let's get started. Okay, in order to start making Linux from scratch, it might sound a little silly, but we have to actually define what is Linux, because it's kind of a misconception. So, when people think of Linux, those who haven't completely lost their minds already, right? You might think of Linux as this third kind of, we say it's an operating system, but computer environment, if that makes any sense. You might have MacBooks with Mac OS, and you might have a PC with Windows, and then you have something else running this mysterious thing called Linux, right? It might be this third option on the downloads page of whatever application you're trying to install. If you're installing something for Windows, it'll give you like an MSI file. If you're installing something for macOS, you'll get a DMG. And if you're installing something for Linux, it'll give you a bunch of scary commands that you want to stay as far away from as you can, right? You might also think of the penguin, right? But if you're a little more, if you've lost your mind a little more, and you understand more about Linux, then you might think of a collection of different things that we call Linux distributions. So when we refer to Linux, this giant web of different distinct operating systems, that's what we're normally referring to, right? These are all operating systems in the same way that Mac OS is its own operating system. It's just that we call them all Linux. They share code between each other, and you can see they all kind of go back to a singular point, which would make you think that Linux itself is its own original operating system, but it's not. So Linux refers to a program on the computer called a kernel, right? The Linux kernel sits on top of your computer's hardware, the motherboard, the bare metal, as we say, and it sits on top of that and provides almost a language for software on top of it to communicate with the hardware, right? It provides things like system calls and allows programs to be more easily written, right? And so the Linux kernel is just a kernel application that is free and open source, which means that anyone can, modify the code, use the code, take it and put it in their own projects. And because of that, because it's accessible, all of these different operating systems use it out of convenience under the hood. And because they use Linux, the Linux kernel, we call them all Linux as if it's one concept, right? And so, given that definition of a Linux distribution, that makes our job really easy if we're trying to make one from scratch. All we have to do is create an operating system that uses the Linux kernel. And there's no other requirement, right? We don't have to make it fancy. We don't have to have even a desktop per se, right? We just need to have the Linux kernel under the hood. And it gets even easier because someone has already written a book about it. So if you go to linuxfromscratch.org, this programmer named Gerard Beekmans has written this. I mean, he calls it a book, but it's really just like a giant collection of web pages. And it goes step by step, command by command, through the process of installing and creating your own Linux distribution with the bare minimum amount of programs, the bare minimum that you need to get started, right? And then, given that information, you might say, oh, well, gee, August, that sounds pretty easy. It sounds like, if you have a book walking you through, that's not gonna take very long at all, is it now? And I said that too. I said, okay, that's gonna take, a couple days, right? And you would think that, wouldn't you? So days 1 through 3. So in order to get Linux from scratch working, you have to inconveniently already have Linux on your computer. Now, as someone who's not completely insane, I don't run Linux every day on my computer. I'd like it so that when I take my SAT, Blue Book doesn't completely crash on me because the College Board hasn't written code that completely, understands the workings of Debian, right? And then everything blows up and everything's ruined. So I don't run Linux on my computer every day. That's a problem because I need that to get started. So I said, okay, how am I gonna install a version of Linux on my computer without completely nuking my hard drive, right? And so I said, okay, we're gonna take something called a virtual machine and install Linux on that. Now, what's a virtual machine? It does exactly what it sounds like. It's a piece of software that creates a computer inside your computer, and on that computer in your computer, you can run any programs you want. You can install whatever operating system you want. Okay, so we're gonna take this virtual machine inside a virtual box. We're going to install a Linux distribution that I already know onto that machine, and then we're gonna use that virtual machine to create Linux from scratch. Did I lose anyone? Okay, good. So then comes another problem, because if we're trying to install Linux on a virtual machine, on a computer inside my computer, it's gonna take up a lot of space on my hard drive. And I like my space on my hard drive. I don't want Linux from scratch taking 500 gigabytes of storage, right? So I said, okay, I need to find a Linux distribution that's gonna take up the minimum amount of space possible, right? And that's perfect because I'm already quite familiar with the Linux distribution Debian. It's very popular. A lot of distributions have their code that originates from Debian, and I'm very familiar using Debian with only the command line. That means no graphics, no desktop, right? We're gonna run it in text-only mode, and if we do that, I'm gonna save so much space on my hard drive. Well, that's perfect, so I said. So I'm gonna install Debian, I'm gonna get the disk image, I'm gonna put it into the virtual machine. That's what I did here. It's gonna install itself, and then it actually installs a desktop for me without me. I didn't tell it to do that, but it installed graphics. I said, okay, I don't want graphics. I want to have it be text-only mode, so I guess we have to delete this installation of Debian and install a new installation. So, I did it again. I went to the install page and I configured it so that it would, I said, okay, we want to be only text mode to save as much space as possible. Okay, we run the installer and then it installs graphics again because I don't know why it did that. So, okay, this is probably user error. I've probably misconfigured something in the install file. I go back onto the Debian website. Okay, I've downloaded the wrong ISO file. I have to re-download the ISO file, and okay, I've misconfigured VirtualBox, so I have to reconfigure VirtualBox, and then we install it again. And then we finally get a command line, right? There's no graphics here. We're saving as much space as possible, right? And so, great, we can continue, right? But no, because if you had read a little, if you had the foresight to read a little into the book, you would have realized that if you're typing in a bunch of very, very long commands, it's very helpful to have the, copy and paste, right? It's very helpful to be able to paste those commands in your command line. And for some reason, if you have it in only text mode on VirtualBox, you can't copy and paste, right? So I have to delete that one and install the desktop anyway, right? And so, okay, great, we can continue, right? But actually, no, because it turns out that if you had read a little bit into the book, you would have realized that some of the commands just don't work. They just don't work on Debian, and I don't know why. It's probably more user error, but so we actually had to nuke that one anyway, install Ubuntu. So that's great, right? So now I should probably explain a little bit about what we're actually going to do to get this operating system installed, right? We've already got our Linux distribution that we're going to use to create the new Linux distribution. Right? What do we need to do that? Well, first we need to create what's called the file system, right? So Linux has a very specific set of, you can think of it as folders within folders. And those folders have to adhere to a very specific structure, which is up here in the top half. So the big slash represents what we like to call the root directory. You should try to remember that because I'm going to say it a lot. The root directory you can think of as the big folder on your hard drive that contains everything else, right? And so in that root directory, represented by the slash, we have a set of folders that we need to create, a set of very specific directories with very specific purposes. You know, some of them have real words as their names, you know, root, boot. Some of them don't. Some of them just kind of random characters, but they all have very specific purposes, right? We're putting very specific files in them, and that's part one of what we're doing here. Part two is we're actually creating the software that we need to get the operating system running. So the operating system, we need a very specific set of different programs that the book is going to tell us, right, and give us and guide us through installing. We also need the kernel, the Linux kernel, right? We've already talked about that. We need something called a bootloader. We're going to be using grub because programmers name their things strange names. And before that, we're going to have the BIOS and the master boot record, which are a little complicated, but we're not going to have to configure those as much, right? So all we're doing when we're creating our own Linux distribution is we're creating this structure of folders. We are installing all the programs, which the book is going to give us, that we need to compose an operating system. We're installing the Linux kernel, and we're installing the bootloader grub. Did I lose anyone? Okay, great. So days 4 through 5, right? The first thing we did was, it's a little hard to see, but we partitioned up our virtual hard drive on our virtual machine. So we're taking our hard drive, we're cutting it up into little pieces, and each of these pieces we need to put specific things on to make the operating system function. Then we run some, funny-looking commands which just allow us to take advantage of these partitions. We're mounting them in certain places on the hard drive and getting, kind of our tools organized, so to speak. And then lastly, what we're doing is we are downloading all the different packages, we call them, or programs that we need to get Linux from scratch up and running. And so let's go into the specifics of how we actually get a program installed, right? So let's take the program GCC for an example, right? GCC, or the GNU C compiler. GNU stands for something, it's a funny organization. CC means C compiler, right? C as in the programming language C, and compiler just means it's a program that takes code written in C and turns it into an actual application that you can run. GCC is a very important program for most Linux distributions. You want to have it if you're going to be doing stuff at a low level, right? And so we're gonna go about installing it. I'm going to show you what I did, right? So we have the GCC tar.xz file. You can just think of that as a fancy zip file. And this command we're running to decompress that file, to take all the files out of the zip file and put it into their own folder so that we can mess around and access it, right? And so that spits out a bunch of vomit onto the screen, and it does that for like a minute and a half. And then we get this new command, configure, right? So here we're just configuring all the options that we want to have for GCC, right? Each one of these lines here is a different option, and then we're just running this little program that comes built in with the GCC package to configure it. And then it spits out some more text vomit, and then we run this little tiny command, right? It's called make, right? And make is such a deceptively small word. If the command is 4 characters, you wouldn't expect it to do a lot, right? But it does that. And I couldn't tell you what any of that means. I'm sure there's someone who say, oh, I know, I can look at that and tell you exactly what it's doing. But they can't. And so it does that. It does that for like an hour and a half, right? Okay, great. We have one package installed. And then you realize that, I had said previously that we're doing the bare minimum here. We're installing the bare minimum amount of packages that we need for a Linux distribution, right? To compose our operating system. And it turns out that the bare minimum is actually quite a lot of packages. And if each of these are taking 5 minutes to an hour and a half to install, you can see how that's my whole afternoon. It's gone, right? Lost of time. day 7 through 8, I really started to go insane, right? The Linux, the computer started complaining to me that it has no name, which is a little strange. So this command, there's a chapter that we've hit here, and it's like entering the chroot environment. And, I really stopped understanding most of what was happening at this point, if I'm being honest. The way I kind of understand it is that, we're taking our big root directory that we have on our normal Ubuntu distribution that we installed to install the new Linux, and we're shifting that over to a new root directory on our new partition of our hard drive. I don't know if that made any sense to you. But that's what that command is doing. And then in addition, we also create like I said, the file system, all the folders within folders that we need at this point in order to create our Linux distribution. That's what we've kind of done here at this command. And also, as a side effect, the computer is complaining that it has no name. And then, we go through the text walls and the text walls and the text walls, more just scrolling for an hour and a half. And, the purple and the white starts to blend together at some point. We take a break to install Vim, the best text editor in the world. And, now it's day 9, right? Day 9 it started off horrible. More text, and then more packages, right? You thought we were done with the packages, didn't you? No, they keep going. And these are each taking an hour and a half to install. And so, it's like, and then the names start to make less and less sense. Some of these are real words, like Python's a real word, but MPC, that's not a real word. ATTR, that's not a real word, and you start to kind of go insane after a while, right? It's just text upon text upon text upon text upon text, and these are each taking an hour and a half to install, and it's just horrible. You start to really question your life decisions, right? You start to get very existential making Linux from scratch. It's just the way, I had said this is the bare minimum. This is not if this is the bare minimum, okay, right? We've installed all the programs, right? I entered on day 9, just that I had entered kind of a meditative state, right? Program and program and program and program, and then all of a sudden, it stops, it ends, right? And we have to do something really scary now. We have to install Linux, like the kernel, right? I was supposed to have screenshots here, but they all look like this because I misconfigured my recording software, so I'm gonna take some stock ones from the internet, right? So you can understand kind of what was happening. So when you want to install the Linux kernel, right, remember we've created our file system, our folders within folders. We've created all the programs that we need for our operating system. Now we just need to install the kernel. And when you install the kernel, the book tells you, okay, you want to go into this menu, right? Okay, great. And then you want to configure all these options. Sounds good. And then the book says, and if you misconfigure any of these options and then you run the program, it's going to brick your entire computer and you're going to have to start all over again. And that's not scary at all, is it? That's, 9 days of my life. So, we'll see. I mean, oh no, I have to scroll all the way back through this. I'm sorry. That's what I get for hitting the back arrow. Okay, right. So, I spend like 45 minutes, just because, the book is telling me that I'm going to blow everything up if I do it wrong. Going through each of these menus, right? It's deceptively nice looking, right? After all that purple and white text, right? The blue and the white it's kind of calming, but it's not. Because once you get into the menus, it's like a maze, right? You have to figure out, okay, this is in here, and this is in here, and this is in here. And you're going through each of the menus and the sub-menus and the sub-menus and configuring all the options. So it takes me like 45 minutes to find what I need to find and make sure that everything's correct. And I said, okay, I think it's all good. I think I'm not going to brick everything, right? And then I press exit and I forget to save. So I have to do it all over again. So, it's another 45 minutes, right? Where we're going menu and menu, and then menu and menu, right? We're configuring all the options, right? Getting them all, making sure that nothing's checked that's not supposed to be checked, right? I don't want to blow up my computer. And then, okay, I think I think it'll be okay, I said. And so I pressed the right button to save, right? And then I would have screenshots here, but like I said, I didn't configure it correctly. So you can take my word, it spit out a bunch of scary text, right? And it took like an hour again. But then we did it. Look, this is our Linux distribution. It's not very magnificent, is it? Thinking back, it's kind of weird that I just followed a bunch of instructions and then all of a sudden the purple turned to black and the white text turned to gray text. I'm not sure how we really got here, is what I'm trying to say. But we did it, right? Great. We have our Linux distribution. It doesn't look fancy at all. We log in and it immediately throws 2 errors at me. So something went wrong. But okay. Now it's day 10. It's time to play around. See what we can do in our fancy high-tech new Linux distribution, right? This is 2025. Imagine all the new things we could do. Okay, so first we have to figure out how to access the internet. And unfortunately, the minimum amount of packages does not include curl or wget, so which are the things that you need to use HTTPS. So I had to figure out how to use the FTP client and go into GNU and download all the things that you need to get the internet running. And then, it spit out, I started to get flashbacks because it started to spit out more text vomit at me, except this time it's black instead of purple. And then it had me edit this giant configuration file, which is a little scary, right? But that's okay. Eventually, we got a web browser working, right? Isn't that wonderful? It's only text and there's no graphics. But now I can use my homemade Linux distribution to browse r/Linux memes. I mean, 2025, guys. This is amazing. I mean, look at this. I tried to run Doom, and it spit out a bunch of nonsense. So, no, it can't run Doom. But, I mean, we can watch Star Wars in text mode. Isn't that great, guys? Right? This is 9 days. 9 days of my life amounted to this. And, at least we can figure out how to exit Vim. I mean, that was funny to 3 people here. This is great, right? Okay, so maybe the question you're asking right now is, well, gee, August, that sounds like you went through 9 days of your life not really understanding what you were doing, and then you ended up creating something that is functionally kind of useless and that you're never going to use again and also doesn't have graphics, and you're going to, why would you do that? And I'd say, I don't know. I guess I can give kind of 3 morals of the story here, right? The first moral would be plan for everything you do in life to take 4 times as long as you expect. The second moral would be please, please, please appreciate the App Store, right? It's so nice to be able to click one button that says install and then have the program install itself for you. I mean, can you imagine if every time you wanted to install Google Chrome, you had to do all of that nonsense, right? And then the third moral of the story would be if you want to understand anything at the highest level you can possibly understand it, you should try to make it from scratch. Now, I understand at this point more about Linux than I ever wished to understand ever. And, that's debatably a good thing. But as an experience, right, just going through each of the steps, right, figuring out what it really means to install an operating system, and then trying to figure out a way to explain it to all of you, right? Through that experience, I've gained an understanding of how Linux works on the inside, that's deeper than I would have ever gotten had I just, read about it, right? And so, if you're interested in making bread, right? Go home and make bread from scratch if you really want to figure it out. If you're interested in making Linux from scratch, I would not recommend it. But if you really want to, you can. Thank you. I hope I didn't lose anybody because that was very technical. Uh, and we're way under time, like I predicted. Anyone have any questions?
All right. Now that you've completed Linux from scratch, what's your next great achievement going to be? Either Gentoo or Arc or
I'm learning assembly, so we're gonna try to C compiler from scratch. We'll see how that goes. Yes. Yeah, but I mean, that probably blow up my computer. I would not recommend running a virtual machine in a virtual machine. Yes.
Have you ever considered using Departed with Grub to dual boot in Linux?
Dual booting is such a pain. It's like I'm gonna have to repartition my hard drive, attach external storage. It's like I don't want to. Linux is a pain sometimes, and I don't want to have to deal with that in my day-to-day life. I can run Linux when I want to run Linux, but when I'm trying to get my schoolwork done, I'm like I don't want to have to deal with it. Yes.
At the point where you were installing packages, how much Linux from scratch, the book, the guide,
Yeah.
how much of it was like customizable? Did they give you many options?
No.
Oh, it's like a very
It's very, very, very rigid. You have to do these things. You have to, right? I'm pretty sure that all of the packages you have, you can't remove any of them. I think it's really the bare minimum.
follow-up question. Could you have gotten yourself to a point where you could make an ISO or get into a state where you can continue to modify this OS?
Yeah, it's.
And keep iterating on it?
I could have virtual machine make an ISO of the operating system, and then I could theoretically just install more packages, right, that I wanted, right? Like I installed Lynx, the web browser, right? If I want that on my Linux distribution, I could install that and have virtual machine create an ISO. But I mean, I guess at that point you'd have to write an installer, which would do all of the things that I did manually, right? And then it gets really like.
And that's all in the guide.
Right, that's all in the guide. Right. Yes.
what was the size of the minimum install?
It was like 15 gigs. Yeah. It takes a lot to run a computer, it turns out. Jeremy. I named it better than Arch. Yes. Oh. No. Yes. Yeah, for some of the packages that you end up installing, you need Python to compile them. I don't remember. it was a long time ago, and it was kind of in the middle of like all of the gobbledygook, Yes. It was building it and then realizing that I didn't want to continue afterwards. And then, I mean, I still have it in the VM if I want to go and figure out how to do things with it, right? I mean, I suppose it would be kind of useful to learn how to do low-level programming because you really have nothing, right? Just trying to get by like that, especially in the context of assembly, but, Yes.
Have you ever thought of making an ISO and then posting it on the web for others to install their own function or to run Debian-based operating system?
No. I'm not wasting my port forward on that. It's, if you want to do it, follow along with the book. That's all I'll say. Are we all done? Oh, yes. It's online. It's on linuxfromscratch.org, and so you can find it there. I did it on a, well, it's on a virtual machine on the PC I built. So it's very, it's got like an i3 and a 1050. It's not, it's not a lot, you know. Yes. No, the virtual machine allows you to run it self-contained inside of its own. Right. It's not my normal computer's fine right now. Yeah. Yes. I wouldn't, if I was going to, if I wanted the maximum control on my operating system, right, I would much rather just install like a minimal Debian and configure it from there, right? Because, you know, especially afterwards figuring out that I don't even have curl, right? I can't even get things from the internet without using FTP, right? It's like all of the things that are in the base installation, the minimal installation of whatever distribution you want to use, right? You're gonna need those things anyway. So it's like, I'd rather just take something that's already been built and configure it from there. Right? Yes?
I'm wondering, where did you find the time within the school year to take Linux from scratch?
So this was before midterms. This was like right after the end of quarter one, right? And that's a good, I should have been working on my research paper, but
I mean, like, was it just like a straight 9 days, or was
it was a straight 9, it was a continuous 9 days. Yes. It was quite unfortunate. Yeah. Are we all done? Great. Thank you so much for coming.